Millionaire hired a black nanny for his disabled son, and what he saw broke his heart. He was a wealthy, single father, cold, distant, and drowning in guilt over his disabled son. She was a humble black nanny with a heart full of compassion. When their worlds collided, he thought he was just hiring help. But what he witnessed in the weeks that followed shattered his heart and changed his life forever. Please support us by subscribing to our channel and tell us where you are watching from. David Carson's life looked perfect on the outside. He was a self-made millionaire in Chicago, running a successful tech company with his sharp intellect and unshakable determination. His luxurious downtown penthouse overlooked the city skyline, and he had everything money could buy. But none of that mattered when it came to his 8-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was born with cerebral palsy, a condition that affected his muscles and movement. He couldn't walk or speak clearly like other kids his age. The doctors had warned David early on that Ethan would need constant care and patience. It was a heavy burden for a single father, especially since Ethan's mother, Lisa, had died shortly after childbirth. David had thrown himself into work to cope, often leaving Ethan in the hands of nurses and therapists. But no one seemed to truly connect with the boy. The caregivers came and went, treating Ethan like just another patient, another task on their list. David felt guilty and helpless, unable to fill the void left by Lisa. He wanted more for Ethan, more than medical care, more than basic attention. He wanted someone who could see Ethan's heart, who could bring light into the boy's quiet world. One rainy evening, David sat alone in his study, scrolling through nanny applications on his tablet. He needed someone special, someone with experience, patience, and kindness. Most of the candidates had glossy resumes, but no real connection with children who had special needs. Then his eyes landed on a profile that caught his attention. Jasmine Moore. She was from a modest background in a nearby suburb, but had years of experience working with disabled children. Her references spoke of her warmth and dedication. There was something genuine about her. David hesitated but decided to call her for an interview. When Jasmine answered, her calm, soothing voice immediately put him at ease. She didn't just talk about qualifications. She spoke about understanding children, about patience, and about love. David felt a flicker of hope for the first time in years. The next day, Jasmine arrived at the Carson mansion. She was warm and friendly, but carried herself with quiet confidence. She didn't seem overwhelmed by the luxury or the pressure. Her focus was clear. Ethan. David watched carefully as Jasmine approached his son. Ethan was sitting silently in his wheelchair by the large window, gazing outside. Jasmine knelt down slowly, smiling gently, and spoke softly to Ethan. At first, Ethan barely reacted. He was used to strangers and often retreated into himself. But Jasmine didn't give up. She hummed a tune and reached out to touch his hand lightly. David saw a flicker of recognition in Ethan's eyes. Something shifted. Maybe this time, things could be different. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the Carson mansion as Jasmine Moore arrived for her first day. The house was grand and impeccably decorated, but Jasmine's eyes were fixed on one thing: Ethan. David greeted her briefly, still carrying the weight of skepticism mixed with hope. Jasmine smiled warmly, her calm presence immediately filling the room with a gentle energy that was missing before. Ethan sat quietly in his wheelchair, staring out at the garden. His face was serene but distant, a silent barrier to anyone trying to reach him. Jasmine didn't rush in or overwhelm him with words. Instead, she moved slowly and carefully, lowering herself to his level and offering a soft, "Hello, Ethan." For the first few hours, Ethan remained quiet, barely responding to Jasmine's gentle prods. He was used to people coming and going, so his world was wrapped tightly in a shell of silence. Jasmine wasn't discouraged. She understood that trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned. She pulled out a small book with colorful pictures and began to read in a soothing voice. Ethan's eyes flickered toward the pages, and Jasmine noticed the slight twitch of his fingers. Encouraged, she kept reading, making sure to use expressive tones and smiles. David watched from the doorway, feeling both anxious and hopeful. He had hired many caregivers before, but none had stayed long enough or connected with Ethan the way he wished. Could Jasmine be different? Throughout the day, Jasmine introduced subtle new routines. She brought in music, soft melodies played on a small speaker, and carefully observed Ethan's reactions. When a cheerful tune played, Ethan's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest of his wheelchair. Jasmine smiled, recognizing this as communication. She spent time gently massaging Ethan's hands and arms, helping ease some of the muscle stiffness. She also talked to him about the things she saw outside the window, the birds, the trees, the sunlight, painting pictures with words to brighten his quiet world. At one point, David approached cautiously. "Does he always respond this slowly?" he asked, trying to mask his frustration. Jasmine met his gaze. "Ethan's world is different. He's not silent because he can't express himself. Sometimes he's just waiting for the right moment, the right person, to understand him." David sighed, realizing the truth in her words. For all his wealth, he had never truly paused to see Ethan's world through his eyes. By the end of the day, Ethan gave a faint smile, a small but significant breakthrough. Jasmine gently touched his hand, and he didn't pull away. The days that followed Jasmine's arrival unfolded quietly but meaningfully. Ethan was still cautious, still guarded in many ways, but beneath the surface, change was happening. Jasmine's patient, unhurried approach was slowly breaking through the walls he had built around himself. Jasmine began to introduce new activities to Ethan's daily routine, things that engaged his senses and encouraged small movements. One afternoon, she brought a small drum wrapped in soft fabric, tapping a gentle rhythm as she smiled at Ethan. David was observing from the kitchen, skeptical yet intrigued. At first, Ethan only watched the drum quietly, but then to David's surprise, Ethan's fingers twitched, attempting to mimic Jasmine's gentle tapping. It was subtle, barely noticeable to an untrained eye, but to Jasmine and David, it was monumental, a breakthrough. "Look at that," Jasmine whispered softly to David. "He's trying. He's communicating in his own way." David felt a lump in his throat. For so long, he had worried that Ethan's condition meant he would never truly connect with his son. But now, witnessing this tiny act of progress, hope sparked in his heart. Jasmine also began bringing colors and art supplies. She encouraged Ethan to use his hands to make simple marks on paper, praising every attempt. Ethan's eyes would light up briefly when she clapped or smiled, moments of joy breaking through his usual quiet. One afternoon, David came home early from a meeting and found Jasmine and Ethan in the garden. Jasmine was playing a soft melody on a small keyboard, while Ethan watched intently. As the music floated through the air, Ethan began to move his fingers in rhythm, his face showing the faintest hint of a smile. David's heart swelled. He realized that Ethan wasn't just a child defined by his disability. He was a boy with feelings, talents, and dreams. Jasmine had seen that from the start. Jasmine's care went beyond therapy. She talked to Ethan as if he understood every word, telling him stories, asking questions, and laughing softly. Her presence transformed the mansion from a sterile, lonely place into a home filled with warmth. Despite the progress, there were difficult moments. Ethan sometimes withdrew, frustrated by his body's limitations. Jasmine never pushed too hard. She simply stayed by his side, offering comfort and encouragement. David found himself watching Jasmine with newfound respect. Her dedication was more than professional. It was deeply personal. He realized that she was teaching him how to be a better father, how to see Ethan not as a project or a patient, but as a child who deserved love and patience. That night, David sat alone, thinking about the journey ahead. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope. Jasmine had opened a door to understanding, healing, and connection. Weeks passed, and with each day, Jasmine's bond with Ethan grew stronger. The quiet boy who once barely acknowledged anyone was beginning to respond, little by little, to the world around him, and most importantly, to Jasmine. One afternoon, as the late spring sun cast warm light across the living room, Jasmine brought out a photo album. It wasn't a fancy one, just a simple book filled with pictures of animals, nature, and children playing. She gently flipped through the pages, pointing at the pictures and softly naming each one. "Look, Ethan," she said, her voice tender and inviting. "That's a dog. Can you see the dog? Ethan's eyes moved slowly to the page. Jasmine held his hand, encouraging him to touch the picture. At first, his fingers trembled, unsure of what to do. Then he pressed gently against the photo of the dog. Jasmine smiled. Good job, Ethan. That's the dog. David, who had been watching quietly from the hallway, felt something inside him stir. This simple exchange was nothing short of miraculous. Jasmine's gentle encouragement gave Ethan the courage to try more. She introduced new pictures and small toys to stimulate his senses. Slowly, Ethan began to mimic her sounds, making soft noises when she named the animals. It was a breakthrough. David was amazed by the progress, but also humbled. He'd spent so long focusing on what Ethan couldn't do that he hadn't realized what Ethan was capable of. If only someone believed in him. One day, David joined Jasmine and Ethan outside in the garden. The three of them sat under a blossoming cherry tree. Jasmine pulled out a small ball and rolled it toward Ethan. At first, Ethan didn't react, but when the ball gently touched his hand, he grasped it for a brief moment. Jasmine cheered softly, and David clapped, feeling tears sting his eyes. For the first time in years, David felt hopeful, not just about Ethan's condition, but about their future as a family. Later that evening, David sat with Jasmine in the study, quietly discussing the boys' progress. Jasmine explained that while Ethan's physical challenges were significant, the emotional and psychological connection was just as important. He's learning to trust again, she said softly. That's the foundation for everything else. David nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized how much Ethan had suffered, not just physically but emotionally from years of neglect and misunderstanding. That night, as Ethan slept peacefully in his room, David made a silent promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to be the father Ethan needed. He would learn patience, he would learn love on a new level, and he would never give up on his son. Because Jasmine had shown him that miracles sometimes come in the quietest moments, in the softest touches, and in the slow, steady building of trust. Despite the small victories, life with Ethan was far from easy. Behind the quiet moments of progress were countless struggles that tested Jasmine's patience and David's resolve. One afternoon, Ethan had a difficult day. His muscles were stiff and painful, making it hard for him to move or even sit comfortably. He became frustrated and agitated, tears welling up in his eyes. Jasmine stayed calm, gently soothing him with soft words and slow, comforting strokes. David, who had just returned from a long day at work, found Jasmine trying to calm Ethan in the living room. The sight was both heartbreaking and humbling. He had never before witnessed the intensity of his son's pain or the depth of Jasmine's dedication. "Do you think he understands what's happening?" David asked quietly. Jasmine looked up, exhaustion in her eyes but also fierce determination. Sometimes it's not about understanding every word. It's about feeling safe, feeling loved. That's what makes the difference. David nodded, realizing that love was more than just a feeling. It was an action, a daily commitment. Jasmine had become Ethan's anchor, steady and reliable. But she was also human. Some nights after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, she would sit alone in the quiet kitchen, rubbing her aching arms and shoulders. Caring for a child with such intense needs was physically demanding. Yet Jasmine never complained. Her motivation came from the moments she saw Ethan smile or respond to her touch. Those moments reminded her why she chose this path. Meanwhile, David was learning to balance his demanding career with his new role as a father who needed to be present. He started rearranging his schedule, cutting back on late meetings and weekend trips. One evening, David surprised Jasmine by joining them for dinner in the garden. It was the first time in months he had taken time off to simply be with Ethan and Jasmine. As they ate, Jasmine shared stories of other children she had cared for, and David listened intently. He began to see that caring for Ethan was a journey that required teamwork and patience. After dinner, Jasmine helped Ethan into his wheelchair and wheeled him around the garden path. David followed, feeling a quiet pride in the small steps his son was taking. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Ethan was no longer alone, and neither was David. The months rolled by, and the Carson household slowly transformed. Ethan's world, once a quiet, isolated place, began to fill with moments of laughter, music, and connection. thanks to Jasmine's unwavering care and David's growing involvement. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jasmine planned something special. She brought in a small basket filled with colorful leaves, pine cones, and soft, textured toys. Her goal was to engage Ethan's senses and bring a little joy into his day. David watched from the doorway, feeling hopeful but still uncertain. Would Ethan respond? Could these simple things truly reach the boy who had seemed so unreachable? Jasmine gently placed a bright red leaf in Ethan's hand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he grasped it. His fingers closed around the delicate edge, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's it, Ethan," Jasmine whispered, her eyes shining with encouragement. "You're doing amazing." David stepped closer, kneeling beside Ethan's wheelchair. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, "look at these cool leaves. They're from the trees outside." Ethan's eyes met his father's for a moment, a small but meaningful connection. David felt a surge of emotion well up inside him. It was the first time he'd felt like a real father, truly seen by his son. Over the next hour, Jasmine led Ethan through a sensory game, showing him different textures and colors, encouraging him to reach out and explore. Ethan's reactions grew stronger, and his smiles became more frequent. David joined in, laughing softly as Ethan's fingers brushed the pine cones and soft toys. For a brief time, the room felt alive with warmth and hope. Later that evening, David sat with Jasmine in the study, reflecting on the day's progress. "I never thought I'd see Ethan like this," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "It's like he's waking up." Jasmine nodded. "He's always been there, David. We just needed to find the right way to reach him." That night, as Ethan slept peacefully, David sat quietly by his son's bedside. He whispered a promise to himself and to Ethan, that he would never stop trying, never stop believing in the boy who was slowly emerging from silence. Jasmine's presence had ignited something powerful, not just in Ethan, but in David too. Together, they were discovering that love, patience, and hope could overcome even the deepest challenges. Winter settled over Atlanta, blanketing the city with chilly winds and gray skies. But inside the Carson home, something beautiful had taken root, something warmer than any fire, deeper than any words. It had been nearly a year since Jasmine first walked through their door. In that time, Ethan had transformed. Though he still faced many challenges, he was no longer a boy hidden behind silence. He now made soft sounds, held eye contact, and even laughed, a sweet, airy laugh that melted hearts every time. One snowy morning, David stood at the window, watching Jasmine push Ethan's wheelchair through the fresh blanket of snow in the backyard. She tossed a handful of snow into the air, and Ethan giggled, a sound David once believed he'd never hear. His chest tightened with gratitude. Later that evening, David sat with Jasmine by the fireplace. He held a small wrapped box in his hands. "You've done more for this family than I can ever put into word," he began. "You didn't just care for Ethan, you brought him back to life, and you brought me back too." Jasmine's eyes softened. "He just needed someone to see him," she said quietly. "So did you." David handed her the box. "This is for you." Jasmine hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When she flipped it open, she found two tiny photos. One of Ethan, smiling with wide, curious eyes, and the other of herself, holding his hand in the garden. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. "David, this is beautiful." He reached for her hand. "You're part of this family, Jasmine, not just as a nanny, as something more. Ethan loves you. I care about you more than I expected. I think we were all a little broken before you came." She didn't respond right away. The silence was full, not empty. Finally, she whispered, "I came here thinking it was just a job, but Ethan, and you've become my whole heart." As the fire crackled beside them, David knew that they weren't just a man, a nanny, and a child anymore. They were something stronger. They were a family formed not by blood, but by choice, love, and sacrifice. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine stayed, no longer an employee, but a cherished member of their lives. David found joy in everyday moments. He laughed more, worked less, and prioritized what truly mattered. Ethan, in his own way, began to thrive. He may never be like other children, but he didn't need to be. He was loved completely, just as he was. And so the Carson home, once cold and sterile, became a place of warmth, healing, and second chances. Because sometimes the most broken hearts create the most beautiful families. This story reminds us that family isn't always about blood. It's about love, patience, and showing up for one another. Jasmine came into David and Ethan's lives as a caregiver, but became so much more, a healer, a friend, and the heart that brought them together. Sometimes the most unexpected people create the biggest impact, and the most broken moments can lead to the most beautiful transformations. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring true life stories. And remember, kindness can change lives. You never know whose world you might light up just by caring.